He called me ma'am again, and this time I didn't stop him. Maybe I wanted to hear how surrender sounded from his lips. His hands, which had been all efficient, capable motion with the router, were now still. One rested on the back of my sofa, an inch from the skin of my shoulder. The air in my pristine apartment wasn't cool anymore. It was thick, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. This was the secret that shouldn't exist, humming between us in the twilight. I could smell the rain on his jacket, the faint clean scent of his soap, and underneath it, something warmer, uniquely him. It was an invasion, when I had, on some fundamental level, invited. "The signal is strong now," he said, his voice lower than it had been an hour ago. It wasn't the internet he was talking about. We both knew it. My world is a fortress of my own design, built of straight lines, polished concrete, and floor-to-ceiling glass. At 38, I am Alara Vance, the founder and principal of Aperture Architects. My name is spoken in the city's design circles with a mixture of respect and trepidation. I have cultivated that. Respect is earned. Fear is a tool. My office, 20 floors above the bustling streets, is a temple to my control. The silence there is deliberate, broken only by the precise click of my heels on the hardwood and the soft, authoritative tone of my voice. I command men who have been in the industry since before I was born. I do it with a lifted brow, a carefully chosen word, a silence that stretches just a beat too long. My power is not, it is absolute. My home, the penthouse apartment in a building I helped redesign, is the inner sanctum of this fortress. Here the control is even more intimate. Nothing is out of place. A single stark white orchid on a reclaimed wood plinth. A bookshelf where the colors of the spines are arranged in a gradual ombre from charcoal to cream. The air smells of bergamot and sandalwood. Never of something as transient as last night's dinner. This space is a reflection of the interior of my skull. Ordered, elegant, and impenetrable. It is the one place where the myriad performances of my life can cease, and I can simply be the silent, watching queen of my own. The first crack in the foundation appeared on a Tuesday afternoon, disguised as a minor inconvenience. Wi-Fi, typically as reliable as the sun, had flickered and died. A single call to building management, a nuisance to be swiftly resolved. He arrived. Leo. I opened the door to find usual, weary middle-aged man, but a young man who seemed to bring the outside world in with him. He was tall, with the kind of loose-limbed grace that spoke of youth and physical confidence. His hair was a sun-streaked brown, a little too long, and his eyes were the color of warm sherry. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and dark jeans, a tool belt slung low on his hips like a gunslinger's rig. "Alara Vance?" he asked, a small, easy smile on his face. "I'm Leo, here about the internet." I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "The router is in the study." He passed me, and I caught the scent of him. Fresh air, cheap, clean laundry detergent, and the faint, sunny aroma of skin. It was a shocking contrast to my curated perfumes. He didn't seem intimidated by the space, as most people were. His gaze swept over it with open curiosity. "His place," he remarked, his fawning, but appreciative, very serene. "Thank you," I said, my voice cool. I retreated to the kitchen island, pretending to look at a portfolio on my tablet, but my attention was entirely on him. He knelt by the router, his back to me. The fabric of his t-shirt stretched taut across his shoulders, and I watched the play of muscle in his arms as he worked. There was a raw, unvarnished masculinity to him that felt entirely out of place in my delicate world. It was disruptive. He fixed the issue in less than 10 minutes. "A loose cable," he said, but instead of leaving, he lingered. His eyes traveled over my bookshelf, pausing on the titles. "You read all these?" he asked. "It's a library, not a decoration," I replied. The frost in my voice intended to deter him. It didn't. He just smiled, that same small, affable smile, and turned to look at the single black and white photograph on my mantel. It was of a cliff face, sheer and powerful, taken on a solo trip to Iceland, a place where nature's control made my own seem laughable. "This is incredible," he said, his voice. "It's lonely." The word struck a chord so deep and so well hidden that I almost flinched. No one had ever seen that in the photo before. They called it dramatic, striking, beautiful, never lonely. It's powerful. I corrected him, a little too sharply. He turned those sherry-colored eyes on me, and for a moment, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. Not as Alara Vance, the architect, the formidable woman, but just as Alara, a woman in a very large, very quiet apartment. It can be both, he said simply. He began packing his tools, his movements slow, deliberate. The air began to change. The professional transaction was over, but he wasn't leaving. I should have guided him to the door. I should have reinforced the boundary. I stood frozen by the island, my fingers gripping the cold marble. As he walked toward the door, he paused in the narrow hallway. The space was tight. He had to turn sideways to pass me, his shoulder, solid and warm. My arm. It was not an accident. A jolt, white-hot and entirely unwelcome, shot through me, settling low in my stomach. I sucked in a sharp, silent breath. He stopped, his face inches from mine. I could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the faint stubble shading his jaw. His gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. The air crackled, heavy, saying, "It would be stable now," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble. The word ma'am was a provocation, a reminder of the gap between us, in age, in status, in everything. It should have angered me. Instead, it felt like a challenge, a dare. I held his gaze. 1 second, 2. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw the question in his eyes, the bold, reckless curiosity. And in that suspended moment, I let him see a flicker of my own. Not an answer, but an acknowledgement, a silent, treacherous admission that hung between us in the perfumed air of my citadel. The line, fully maintained my entire life, had been crossed. It was so subtle, so quiet, it barely felt real. But the echo of his presence, the phantom heat where his shoulder had touched my arm, remained long after the door had clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the serene, silent and suddenly suffocating perfection of my home. The days after his visit were marked by a strange, humming static in my fortress. The silence I had so carefully cultivated was no longer peaceful. It was expectant. I found myself listening for the hum of the elevator, the tread of a footstep in the hall. My own space had turned against me, every polished surface a potential mirror to show me my own distraction. I told myself it was nothing. A fleeting moment of weakness, a spark of impropriety that would fizzle out in the cold light of routine. But Leo had other plans. He began to orbit my world with a quiet, unnerving persistence. I was in the lobby signing for a delivery when I saw him by the concierge desk, laughing with Ben, the daytime doorman. His eyes found mine over Ben's shoulder, and the laugh on his lips softened into that knowing smile. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. My heart hammered against my sternum, a caged bird beating against its ribs. I looked away first, my cheeks burning. The following Tuesday, a coffee appeared on my desk in the office. A simple black ceramic cup, not the disposable cardboard from the cart downstairs. My assistant Sarah peeked in. "The building tech dropped that off for you. Said it was a courtesy for the ongoing network issues." There were no network issues. The coffee was perfect, dark, no sugar, just how I took it. He'd remembered. The gesture was a grenade disguised as a favor. It was him saying, "I see you. I remember you." The pretense of control became a full-time performance. In my glass-walled office, during a tense meeting with concrete suppliers, my gaze would drift to the window, and I'd imagine I saw his reflection in the glass, leaning against the doorframe, watching me. I started wearing my armor more deliberately, sharper blazers, higher heels, a more severe pull to my bun. I was fortifying the walls, precisely because I felt them crumbling. Our encounters were brief, charged circuits of tension. He'd be in the basement utility room as I was leaving the gym, my skin flushed and damp, feeling vulnerable in my leggings and tank top. "Ma'am?" he'd say, his eyes doing a slow, appreciative sweep that left me feeling more exposed than if I were naked. "Leo," I'd reply, my voice a shard of ice, hoping to conceal the inferno beneath. "Signal holding up?" "Perfectly." It was never about the signal. It was a chess game played with glances and double entendres. He was pushing boundaries under the mask of professional innocence, and I, the master of boundaries, was letting him. One evening I worked late at the office, the cityscape twinkling beyond my windows like a scattered diamond necklace. I heard the soft chime of the service elevator. My breath hitched. I knew it was him. He appeared in my doorway, holding a small flowering plant in a simple terracotta pot. A jasmine, its tiny white blooms scenting the air with an intensely sweet, nocturnal fragrance. "A peace offering," he said, placing it on the corner of my desk. "The building's been giving you trouble." "I don't need peace," I said, not looking up from my blueprints. "The building is fine." "It's not for the building," he said softly. "It's for you. It blooms at night, when everything else is quiet." His perception was a weapon. He saw the loneliness I hid behind my power. The quiet hours I filled with work and wine and the hollow sound of my own footsteps. He was offering solace, and it was the most dangerous thing he could have done. The unraveling accelerated. It was in the texture of the paper beneath my hand as I signed a work order he'd brought up, our fingers brushing. It was in the scent of that jasmine on my desk, a perfume that began to haunt my days. It was in the sound of his voice when he finally stopped pretending. It happened during a storm. A proper biblical deluge that lashed against my apartment windows, turning the world outside into a blurry, impressionist painting. The intercom buzzed, sharp and intrusive. "Ms. Vance? It's Leo. We've got a reported network fluctuation on the upper floors. Can I come up and check your connection?" A lie. A bold, transparent lie. I stood in the center of my living room, my heart pounding. Every rational cell in my body screamed to deny him, to tell him to check it in the morning. But another part, a part I had kept chained in the deepest, darkest part of myself, was already turning the deadbolt. I pressed the button. "Come up," he was drenched. Water plastered his hair to his forehead, dripped from his jacket onto my floor. He looked like something wild washed up from the storm, his youth and vitality a shocking intrusion in my dry, controlled world. He didn't even pretend to check the router. He just stood there, water pooling around his boots, his chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. "Why is a woman like you always alone, Alara?" The question was a gut punch. It stripped away the ma'am, the professional pretext, everything. It was just him asking me. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual easy confidence, and filled with a genuine aching curiosity. The woman who commanded boardrooms, who made seasoned contractors tremble, felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. The carefully constructed persona of Alara Vance shattered, and all that was left was a 38-year-old woman who was terrifyingly, profoundly lonely. "You shouldn't ask questions you're not prepared to hear the answers to," I whispered. My voice was frail, a thread of sound almost lost in the drumming of the rain. He stepped closer. The scent of rain, cold night air, and him filled my senses. The space between us, that carefully maintained no man's land, evaporated. His hand came up, not to touch me, but to hover a hair's breadth from my cheek. A question, a plea. My control, the defining force of my adult life, did not shatter with a roar. It dissolved with a sigh. It was the weight of all the silent dinners, the untouched other side of the bed, the hollow echo of my own success. It was the look in his eyes, not of conquest, but of understanding. I leaned into it. The touch of his palm against my cheek was electric, searing. It was calloused, real, so devastatingly human. A small broken sound escaped my throat. His other hand came up to cradle my face, his thumb stroking the arches of my cheekbones. He was looking at me as if I were the most fascinating, most fragile thing he had ever seen. "Alara," he breathed, and my name had never sounded like that before. It wasn't a title, it was a confession. That was the moment everything changed. The moment the power dynamic, so clear and so thrilling, blurred into something else entirely. The boy I thought I held in the palm of my hand was the one who held me now. His touch both an anchor and the thing that was setting me adrift. He spoke my name in a tone that broke my certainty, that made a mockery of all my rules. The act ended not with a kiss, but with the devastating silence that followed my surrender, a silence louder and more profound than any storm. As I stood there, my face in his hands, my fortress well and truly breached. The consequences did not arrive with the blare of trumpets or the sting of public scandal. They seeped in, slow and insidious, like a fine mist through the seams of my fortress. The ghost of his touch became a permanent resident, a phantom limb that ached in the stillness. My sleek minimalist apartment was no longer a sanctuary. It was a museum dedicated to a single illicit memory. The sofa where he'd first almost touched me, the kitchen counter where he'd left the coffee, the hallway where his shoulder had brushed my arm. Every surface was a monument to my transgression. He became a constant, a secret rhythm beneath the composed metronome of my life. He'd appear at my door late in the evening, a 6-pack of expensive imported beer in hand, something he'd noticed I liked. There were no more excuses about the internet. The pretense was gone, burned away in the storm. We existed in a bubble of stolen time, a twilight world that belonged only to us. In the dark, with the city lights painting shifting patterns on the ceiling, he was not a boy, and I was not a queen. We were just two bodies seeking solace in the heat and the silence. He learned the landscape of my skin with a reverence that felt like worship, and for a few fleeting hours, the echoing loneliness would vanish. But dawn always came, and with the light, the reality would reassert itself. I would wake to find him watching me sleep, his expression one of such open, unguarded wonder that it felt like a physical blow. He was falling in love, and his love was a hungry, demanding thing. It wanted more than the shadows. It wanted mornings. It wanted to leave a toothbrush in my holder. It wanted to hold my hand in the elevator. "Stay," he'd murmur into my hair on a Sunday morning, his arm a heavy, warm weight across my waist. "I have work," I'd reply, already extracting myself, the chill of the floor a shock to my system. "It's Sunday. The world can wait. I can't." The distance between our worlds was a chasm no physical intimacy could bridge. He talked of road trips, of music festivals, of a future that was messy and loud and full of life. I talked of deadlines, of investors, of the delicate politics of preserving my hard-won empire. His love was an expanding universe. Mine was a carefully guarded star on the verge of collapse. The first crack in our bubble appeared as a whisper. Sarah, my assistant, gave me a long, careful look one afternoon after Leo had lingered a moment too long at the reception desk. "He's here a lot," she said, her tone neutral. "The building is old." "There are always issues," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She just nodded, but the doubt was now a seed in the fertile ground of my own guilt. The real exposure, however, happened inside my own mind. I was in a meeting, presenting a multi-million-dollar design, my voice cool and authoritative. And all I could think about was the way Leo had traced the line of my spine the night before. The memory was so vivid, so sensory it was like a drug. I was becoming addicted to him, to the way he made me feel. Not powerful, but seen. And that was far more dangerous. My power was built on the illusion of impenetrability, and he had found the key to the one door I had sworn was locked forever. He sensed my retreat. The more he tried to pull me into the light, the further I withdrew into the familiar, cold comfort of my control. The dynamic shifted. The pursuer became the desperate. The boy who had been so bold became a man who was pleading. Our final meeting was in my office, after hours. The setting was a cruel irony. The very symbol of my power was to be the stage for my surrender. The jasmine plant he'd given me sat on the windowsill, its scent now cloying, suffocating. "You're pushing me away," he said. He stood by the window, his back to the glittering city, his face in shadow. "Why? Because you're afraid someone might find out that Alara Vance is human? That she has a heart that beats?" "You knew what this was," I stated. I was behind my desk, my hands flat on the cool glass surface, anchoring myself. I was channeling the woman I used to be, the one who hadn't been cracked open. This was never meant to be a public affair. It was a distraction, a temporary one. The lie was a blade, and I wielded it with surgical precision, aiming for the most vulnerable part of him. I saw him flinch as if I'd struck him physically. "A distraction?" His voice was low, bruised, disbelieving. "Is that what you call it? You let me in. You showed me everything. And it was just a distraction? You walked into my life, Leo. You were a novelty, a spark. But sparks die out." Each word was ash in my mouth. I was systematically destroying the most beautiful, terrifying thing that had ever happened to me, because I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was not built to sustain it. I was built to conquer and move on. I was not a gardener. I was a hurricane, and I left ruins in my wake. The love in his eyes curdled into something else, betrayal, then a cold, clear hatred. The passion that had once melted my resolve now froze into a weapon. "You're a coward," he said, the words flat and final. "You have this entire city at your feet, and you're terrified of one real thing. You'd rather be alone and powerful than loved and real." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked out of my office. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut with a soft, definitive sound that echoed in the vast, silent space, more final than any explosion. He was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a throne room after the revolution, of a fortress after the siege is over and the invaders have left. I had won. I had preserved my control, my boundaries, my impeccable, solitary world. I walked to the window and looked down at the jasmine plant. I picked up the terracotta pot, feeling its rough, earthy texture. Then I opened the window and dropped it. I didn't watch it fall. I just listened for the distant, insignificant crash. He'll remember me as the woman who taught him control. He'll never know how much I lost keeping mine. The story closes not with redemption, but with this silence, the kind that follows when both power and love have burned out, leaving only the truth. I was never meant to be saved, and he was never meant to survive me.